You're listening to Epic Footnote Productions. Go to linktree/Epic Footnote for links to all of our streaming platforms, YouTube channel, social media pages, and merch site. That's linktr.ee/Epic Footnote.
Hey everyone, what's going on? It's If You Have to Pick Three. It's Matt.
And it's Zach.
I get a top three list. Zach gets a top three list in a category. This year marks 20 years since the year 2004. And it just so happens that there were a lot of really good albums that we're going to have to pick from when we're picking the top three albums released in 2004.
If you listen to any of our episodes in the past, you know I love to say, hey, Matt, ready to feel old? I don't like saying it in this one. I think this...
I know. You.
No, this one sucks. I hate myself right now because we've done the best of 2006 to celebrate 15 years. And then it was like a few years ago. I can't do math right now. And I didn't feel that old. I mean, I was like, oh, wow, that's been a while. But something about saying 2004 was 20 years ago, I feel yucky. I feel sad. Not just because, there was so many great albums, but there's so many albums that I just became so passionate about, and I still am passionate about, and it still takes me back to my young self discovering it. I think really starting from like 1999, which is 25 years ago, feeling old, starting in that year and then onwards is when I really think I discovered music on my own. It wasn't just watching shows that, talked about the history of music. I was like, oh, that was a cool old band I really like. Like it was a time where I really felt like I was discovering new music myself. Yeah, of course, MTV was, probably helping with that. I know, and the algorithms that existed, I guess, before internet. But yeah, I feel old saying 20 years ago was 2004. So here we are to name the best albums of 2004, ... that are not named American Idiot. Yes, American Idiot came out 20 years ago. If you've listened to any of our episodes, you know that Matt and I think that not only is this one of Green Day's best albums, it's probably one of the best albums in rock or music, really, period, of the past 20 plus years. I won't even go down the rabbit hole as to why, because we've done so many episodes where we talk about this. We've done a whole episode of What If dedicated to just the history of that album being made and how it almost didn't get made. We've even talked about at great length about that amazing album while reviewing Green Day's new album, Saviors, available on any streaming platform you listen to. So, no, we're not going to talk about that. And we're already going to say, no, that album's off limits. We know that is the greatest album of 2004, if not of the past 2 or 3 decades even. So, Matt, with that said, would you like to go first and share your 3 album choices?
Really?
Yeah.
Can I? Okay.
Please, I insist. Get that old school iPod up. Show me your playlist. Was playlist the thing in 2000? No, that wasn't.
Yeah, it was.
Was it?
Yeah, it wasn't as easy as to make it as it is.
Well, that's what I think. I don't think I did it because I was still like an album freak, like into albums as opposed to like just picking out random songs, and it was difficult to do on the old school. I had the U2 iPod, the red circle.
Oh, the red one.
Yeah, I loved it. It was so cool.
I had one of the white brick looking ones, not the real thick one, the one right after the thick one.
Mm-hmm. No, I thought it was a badass until it broke. It broke pretty fast.
Oh God. And the shitty sturdy earbuds that they had.
Yeah, they were not sturdy back then.
All right.
Anyway,
well, let's kick this off. So this is going to surprise you a little bit.
Will it?
I really started getting into metal a lot more in the early 2000s. And it wasn't probably until 2008 or 2009 where I really got going with metal like heavy. Mm-hmm. But one of the albums that was almost kind of a gateway, and when I think back on it, it really was a gateway to finding out who Slipknot actually was. I really only had like your typical singles from Slipknot, just Wait and Bleed was really the only single that I had before listening to the Subliminal Verse Volume 3, Volume 3 the Subliminal Verse, before somebody bites my head off that I said the title improperly.
How could you?
I know, how could I? But this really was Slipknot staying true to who they were, but doing it in a more hard rock way that was accessible to a lot of people. Because if you listen to like Iowa, it was stupidly heavy, and listening to songs like People Equal Shit or some other like really heavy Slipknot songs, it's hard if you're not really into that to get into it. But on volume 3, the subliminal verse, you've got songs like Duality and Before I Forget and Vermilion that really help people get into Slipknot. Like, this is a band that knows how to write a really good song, and it's, if your ear is untrained and you're just listening to all this really heavy guitars and banging and smashing on drums, like it's not really that easy to get into. But this album, I feel, introduced a lot of people into Slipknot, not only because it was a great album, but because the songs were so accessible to the point that they were also on Guitar Hero at the time. And Before I Forget, I believe, was the track that was on there. And it was one of those songs that it was like really hard to get past. So you heard it a lot, and it was on repeat because you're trying to get past it. And it's just a really great song. And also, it was one of the music videos that was, I think, one of the most impactful at the times, because it was really shot from the perspective of if the band took their masks off and just hung them up while they were doing a performance, and you're just catching like the blurry half of somebody's side head, and you're not seeing who the band members actually are. And there's so much intrigue that's around the band in this music video. It's not like when Kiss took off their makeup and they were just like these guys walking down the streets of New York City. This still left a lot of intrigue, and it made you dig a little bit deeper to see, well, can I see their face? Who are these guys? So I really think that this is one of their best albums, and probably, I think, one of their best selling albums to date. So that's the first album. Second album is another album that I discovered in 2004, but really didn't get into it more until a couple of years later. And I realized its true greatness years later. And it's The Killer's Hot Fuss. This album really was something different, right? Like, you had Franz Ferdinand and Modest Mouse coming out with these really weird sounds. Like, no other band really sounded like them, but there was just something missing, right? Like, Modest Mouse had Float On, and it was really it was an interesting song. Don't get me wrong. I kind of associate that with like Flagpole Sitta from Harvey Danger from years and years earlier. Franz Ferdinand was a little bit more straight on and a very like offbeat song. And that, led that album. That album was okay. But the Killers really knew how to write an electro pop song and do it well. Like, they did it really well. So much to the fact that all these years later, when people say like, you don't know Mr. Brightside, people fail to realize that that's on their debut album. Like, it's got 2 billion streams on Spotify for a reason. It is one of their best songs that they've ever written. It's so good. It's a classic at this point. I hate to say it that way, but it's a classic.
They're performing it in its entirety for an 8-date residency in Vegas to celebrate it. So
yeah. And like, Smile Like You Mean It, Somebody Told Me. Like, Mr. Brightside eclipsed Somebody Told Me, and Somebody Told Me was the lead single from the album. And all these things that I've done, I can't tell you how much I love both of those songs, Smile Like You Mean It and all these things I've done. Like, they might not be the most popular songs, but they are such great earworms that I'll find myself just like thinking about them randomly. Like, what's that? Oh yeah, that's the Killers. And I really think that they captured lightning in a bottle when it came to like something new, something fresh for the early 2000s, when music really was starting to, like, you could see it starting to trend more electronic, but for like the pop and rock genres, they really needed like a kick in the tail to kind of get them away from some of the trends of the late 90s. And this was it. This was such a great album. And there's still a lot of content online where, and this is kind of where I was going with this, that there's so much content where, like musicians who haven't heard this song, they'll make them listen to it and write their own parts to it. And it's like, you could see the people who kind of put the episodes together. They're like, do you really not know what this song is? Have you ever heard of this band? Like, no. Okay. Well, it's just hard to believe that there's somebody or people that are out there that have not heard this album, because it's everywhere. It's in movies and TV and people reference it all the time. So that's number 2, The Killers, Hot Fuss. And number 3, I have an interesting history with this one because, like I said, I wasn't starting to get into metal really heavy until like a little later on in the 2000s. And I used to work for a pop dance radio station here in the New York area. And I very vividly remember when Usher came out with the Confessions album. The lead single was the song with Little John and Ludacris, Yeah. And when I tell you, I have not heard a song any more than I've heard that. This is probably the song that's been drilled into my head the most over my entire life. That song is going to live with me forever, because every night that I went to work, I was guaranteed to hear this song at least 4, 5, 6 times. And then we would have to go do events that were at clubs. And because the song was new and fresh at the time, again, you were guaranteed to hear this every single time you went to work. But on top of that, there were so many other amazing songs on here, like Confessions Part 2, Burn, Caught Up. He did a duet with Alicia Keys, My Boo, and it's such a great R&B hip hop album that I think even still feels fresh today. And that's hard to do, right? To have, especially like, and I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's just how I feel, and I felt like this about them for a while. But like bands like, or like acts like Run DMC and the Beastie Boys, they do kind of feel encapsulated in their time, and it's not a bad thing. It's just it doesn't sound fresh. It's not something that you would hear today. But Usher, the way that he put these songs together and the way that the beats flow through the album and the production of the whole album, it just feels like it could have been put out last month or last year and everybody still loves it. Like, yeah, really has never faded away in 20 years.
There's a reason why he is performing at the Super Bowl halftime in 2024.
There's just so many.
It's this album.
There's so many things that can be said about the way that his music just kind of resonates, and it still feels it feels timeless from an R&B perspective. It does feel timeless, and I know it might be hard for some people to hear that, and it might be the way that I'm articulating it, but his music, he's pretty timeless if you sit back and you think about it. So those are my 3. So you have
hold on, to build off of also Confessions. I mean, yeah, that was a hugely successful, massive album of 2004. Probably the most, I think it was actually the most successful album of the 2000s, only behind NSYNC's No Strings Attached. I mean, to your point, it sounds so timeless. I mean, the song Throwback, I was listening to it actually recently, and my God, that still rocks. And I mean, it's funny, in 2004, I feel like people like were going, yeah, Justin Timberlake, I think he's going to be the next Michael Jackson. And then Usher comes and goes, oh yeah, hold my beer, and then performs Caught Up. Like, that song still freaking slaps, which maybe is a weird thing for me to say out loud, but my goodness.
So I'm going to let Zach have his turn, but my 3 to round this out are Slipknot's Volume 3 of the Subliminal Verses, The Killers' Hot Fuss, and Usher's Confessions.
All right. Those are some damn good picks. And I could probably talk about that Slipknot album for days and days too. My goodness. But yeah. God, I forgot that this album came out that year. I'm old. Anyway, let's talk about some other albums that make me feel old. Let's first get into an album that, admittedly, maybe time hasn't been so kind to it, mainly because the band members involved have returned to their original bands. And unfortunately, the singer has passed away. And as they were kind of going into the sophomore album, they lost a lot of steam, but People forget that this particular album was not only really freaking good, like better than it really should have been, but was also massively successful. I'm talking about Velvet Revolver's Contraband. You gotta remember that it took Slash, Duff McKagan, and Matt Sorum a while to find a singer. Even once they, tapped Scott Weiland, it was, on the rocks because he was going through some legal battles and his addiction. And, even on top of that stuff, yes, Stone Temple Pilots and Guns N' Roses not completely polar opposites, but made a lot of people go, could these elements really coexist? And then they release freaking Contraband. Yes, the singles Slither and Set Me Free were great. And then, of course, Fall to Pieces was maybe overplayed throughout the year and the year following because it was a great rock ballad. But then, like, even some of the deeper tracks that I still listen to, like Headspace or You Got No Right, Illegal Eye Song, it was a freaking great hard rock album. And it was also massively successful. Like, it did something kind of remarkable. It made people go, wow, that's Slash from Velvet Revolver. Like, people forget how successful this band was that year. They actually, I think, Usher was number one on the charts for weeks and weeks and weeks. I think Velvet Revolver was the first band to actually knock them off the top spot on the Billboard charts. They were off to the races, well done, and giving Guns N' Roses a run for their money, which maybe wasn't so hard considering at that point Axl going through his own problems and the false starts with the Chinese Democracy era. But they really were making a name for themselves. And it's almost, we could do a whole what if episode about Velvet Revolver. And if they had maybe, not imploded or found a new singer faster or did a different sophomore album instead of Libertrad. Contraband was just such a great hard rock album at the time when it had a lot of the dangerous elements of Guns N' Roses with a more of modern feel of Stone Temple Pilots. It was a fresh hard rock band that wasn't just trying to cater to radio, which is so rare at that point. So don't think Contraband gets enough credit. And that's my first pick. Second pick is an album I've talked about in the past, if you have to pick 3 episode, and definitely ruffled some feathers by saying it was one of the best pop punk albums. And I could understand why, because the more you listen to 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge by My Chemical Romance, it's a little bit of a cop-out to just say it's pop rock or emo. Of course, everyone knows I'm Not Okay, which is still a great freaking song. But songs like Thank You for the Venom, Hang 'em High, To the End, Give 'em Hell, just so many freaking great songs on this that are just, they intertwined so many different types of rock. There's little metal influences with the guitar solos. There is hardcore elements like Queen, like theatrics, like even before they did Black Parade, they were showing that theatrical side with certain songs on this. This album solidified My Chemical Romance as a band to really take seriously, and also really helped change the wave of what we were expecting from alternative rock and pop punk, especially in that time. You had the goofier side of Blink-182 in the early 2000s, and then My Chemical Romance came along going, no, of course we can have a little fun here, but we're not just making dick jokes here. We're here to be taken actually seriously. And you can even make the argument that it kind of helped give a little groundwork for American Idiot, which came out a few months later, into changing the wave of how people reviewed heavier rock at that point. Gerald Wade also, my goodness, he just sounds amazing on every song. And I think also Ray Toro is probably one of the most underrated guitar players in rock music of the past 20 years. Yeah, I said it. It's just a great, great album from start to finish. I honestly go back and forth. If you ask me one day which My Chemical Romance album is my favorite, I could sometimes say Black Parade, and then I can quickly go to 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge the next day. It's amazing to hear an album that still sounds there's just a sense of danger on each track while still emotion to it, and it's still something that's kind of missing in a lot of rock bands, and they just captured it so well in this album. So second pick, 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge by My Chemical Romance. So for my third pick, this was a little tricky because there's a few albums that I was going to consider putting in as my third pick because, to backtrack a little bit and, get in a side tangent here, 2004 really may have been one of the most incredible years for metal music. Maybe even one of the best for heavy music in general of the past 2 or 3 decades. You often hear fans talk about the new wave of American heavy metal. Well, 2004 is when that scene really broke out. As Matt mentioned, Slipknot released their own game changer of an album. But then you also saw bands like Lamb of God, Mastodon, Killswitch Engage, Shadows Fall, just to name a few, that released albums that really solidified their presence in the music scene. And in particular, Killswitch Engage's The End of Heartache and Shadows Fall, The War Within really helped expose metalcore to a much larger audience. I'd even dare say that The War Within is one of the most underappreciated albums of the past 20 years. I mean, people forget how huge that was in 2004 and 2005. And I'm glad to see that Shadows Fall is, reunited to perform in support of that anniversary. But then you also had Lamb of God's Ashes of the Wake and Mastodon's Leviathan that added more layers to what people consider to be heavy music in 2004, adding more extreme, aggressive sounds and even more technical, progressive elements to heavy music for the masses, to the point that it's almost astonishing at that point that it even gained as much of a following as it did, considering with its sounds. Now it's understandable, without doubt, those two albums still are extremely influential on heavy, extreme sounding metal bands today. So I was really tempted to choose one of those four albums. But as much as I hate to pick an album that my colleague and co-host already has said, I do have to go with The Killer's Hot Fuzz as well. I mean, it really is just that damn good of an album. About 5 years ago, we did an episode where we named the best debut albums that were not Appetite for Destruction. And initially I was like a little like, I feel guilty naming this as one of my, favorite debut albums. But the more I listen to it, as every year goes by and I revisit that album, I go, no, this is a great album. I mean, as Matt mentioned, not just the singles itself, but every song that is just so good. It still sounds so fresh. I mean, I still actually remember the first time. I feel like it was like almost like back to back. It's funny you mentioned Franz Ferdinand because I remember seeing the video for Take Me Out and then the video for Somebody Told Me by The Killers. I'm like, oh my goodness, these two bands, it's a rat race. Who's going to be like the new rock band of 2004? And I forget the second single that Franz Ferdinand came out with after that. I'm like, whatever. And then The Killers released Mr. Brightside. I'm like, ding, ding, that's the winner right there. That's the song. And it's still been the song 20 years later. Back in September of 2023, I got to see The Killers do a headlining set at See Her Now. And those songs still sound incredible live. Like, I've always loved Sam's Town a little bit more. And we talked about this in the Best Albums of 2006 episode, but it's still a testament to just how 20 years later, every song off Hot Fuzz just still sounds just so passionate and so fresh and unique. It's the right mix of alternative and electro and rock. There's a very few bands that you listen to and you go, oh, I can totally understand how these new bands totally were influenced by The Killers or totally influenced by My Chemical Romance even and Linkin Park. Like, there's just a handful of bands that you just like hear the blueprint of in every band that has followed since, and The Killers are one of them. Just like how I would argue, same deal with My Chemical Romance, same deal even Queens of the Stone Age and Linkin Park, just throwing some names out there too. But yeah, so I have to say Hot Fuzz is one of my top three as well. So to recap, for my final three: Velvet Revolver's Contraband, My Chemical Romance's Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge. I don't know why I love saying it like that. And The Killers' Hot Fuzz. So, Matt, clearly, The Killers' Hot Fuzz is going to be in the final three.
Absolutely.
And I think I have to go with Usher's Confessions too. Like that, like, no crap. Like, that was the biggest album of that year. And like I said, of even the decade. And I would probably make the argument that the third spot has to go to My Chemical Romance's Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge too. Oh, we're getting our first little fight over here.
Take.
We're getting our first little hot fight.
If I was gonna pick one of the albums, man, I see what you're doing here.
So here's the thing. Also, I should say, I mean, I love Volume 3, Smooth Reverses by Slipknot. That was the album that made me actually a fan of Slipknot. Before I forget, still an incredible song. And that album showed their maturity while still not necessarily compromising their extreme sound. It was the perfect next level step. However, I still would argue that Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge is the better album. And it's also the more influential album on a broader scale of both just popularity, but also on other bands.
Well, see, you assumed that I was going to talk about Slipknot.
No,
I
I
was,
know you were going
I,
to. I wasn't
I,
assuming. I just wanted to throw that out there because I wanted to give some love to Slipknot too. Were you going to
I,
choose Velvet Revolver?
I was going to choose Velvet Revolver.
Ooh. I would love to hear. Listen. I'm all about giving Velvet Revolver some love. So I mean, let me hear your. I mean, I'm still actually not sure I would agree, but please continue.
So, thinking back, right, there was no bigger whoa moment in 2004 than when the first single and video came out. It's almost like Audio Slave, right? When their debut came out, this was the same exact impact. It's like, wait a second. You're telling me that Guns N' Roses and the Stone Temple Pilots came together and formed this band, and it has the fire underneath it of Appetite for Destruction while having the uniqueness and quirkiness of the Stone Temple Pilots? What the hell is this? And it was dark and moody, and Scott Weiland had no shirt on and barely had pants on. And it's like, this
Do you want
album,
Scott Weiland any other way though?
sober.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
That solves a lot of things. But
Yeah, but you
besides
could
that,
be sober and pantless. Anyway, that's beside the point. That's my quote of the night. You could be sober and pantless. Continue.
but I mean, I don't think that there was any bigger album that came out in that time than Velvet Revolver. The only thing that I can say that is kind of a detriment to the album is that it didn't have very many catchy songs that a lot of people heard a lot of. But for what the album was,
Fall
and
to
if we're talking
pieces.
about
Fall to pieces. Set me
no,
free.
no, no. I'm not saying that they. I'm not saying that those aren't. I'm saying that for the 13 tracks that are on the album, outside of those couple that you mentioned, there's not a lot of really like hooky songs that people could get into, and that's a lot of what music was in the early 2000s because you're still reliant on radio and TV and music videos and things like that to hook you. And there wasn't a there were some, there weren't a lot, but for what was there, it was incredible.
So, but I still I would say though that it's just one of those. I think history has forgotten how big and how many singles are off that album too. I mean, they toured behind that album for at least a good 2 3 years. I mean, I saw them 4 times live in total, twice on in support of that album alone. And I always said that there are songs like "You Got No Right" and "Headspace" that should have been freaking singles and that weren't for whatever reason. And maybe just mainly because "Fall to Pieces" was so big and popular that they didn't even need another single.
Oh,
Did you ever see them live?
no.
They were really good live. We could do a whole episode about Revolver. Like, it still saddens me that band imploded the way they did. You can make the argument that Libertad was a proof that like maybe this was not built to last. But
And yeah, and I remember like still searching through like LimeWire or Napster or whatever the hell was around at the time to try to find like singles off of the third album because
you mean, well, second album. They only did two.
no, third album. Like I know they didn't make it to a third, but like searching for them because maybe somebody leaked something.
Oh, well, I mean, there's also just, it's fascinating because like it's slowly coming out like how close they really were to replacing Scott Weiland. Like, apparently, according to Corey Taylor, they really did actually do a bunch of demos that for whatever reason Slash was like, I'm not feeling this. And they just put the kaput on that. And then there's also like a point when they were actually recording some demos for Frankie Perez, who he sang in Apocalyptica. He was also a guitarist in Scars on Broadway. Good voice. That they even like did like a surprise like mini little set with him for like a random Vegas party show that was almost kind of like to test the waters to see like could this work. And for whatever reason, after that performance, all the members were like, I don't know. But like they came close to like getting someone. And that's just from what we know about that was kind of leaked. But I think ultimately Slash was just like, you know what? Something that also, I mean, again, around 2010 when like they were like pretty much towards the end of trying their search of finding a new singer, Slash was like, nah, I'm more interested in doing a solo album. And Duff actually was in Jane's Addiction for like a hot minute. So they were already kind of like, yeah, it's gone. And by that point, it's just a shame because pretty much after 2010, people just kind of were like, whatever, Velvet Revolver was its thing. And they forget how big that band really was.
And that's why I say that should be the third album.
And you know what? You convinced me. So there you have it. The final three: The Killer's Hot Fuzz, Usher's Confessions, and Velvet Revolver's Contraband. Do you all agree with our picks? Do you also feel really, 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 really old when you realize that 2004 was 20 years ago? Let us know. Vent about how old you are on Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok, Threads, at Epic Footnote. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can hear a ton more episodes featuring some of the artists that we just talked about in this episode, as well as just literally tons of If You Have to Pick 3 episodes where we discuss also anniversaries of albums and just hear us go on and on about how we feel old. And also a special thank you to Lucky 13 Beard Co.
Log on to Lucky13, beardco.com. And if you've been looking for some beard bombs and oils, this is the company you're going to want to go to if you haven't heard of them yet. They have some of the best feeling and best smelling beard bombs and oils on the market. We've got our own with them. It's called the Lemmy, in tribute to Lemmy from Motorhead. Bourbon, tobacco, cola, leather. They smell incredible. They feel epic. And we're going to give you 10% off to try their products. Use the code EFP10 at checkout. 10% off of everything inside of your cart. Lucky13, beardco.com. Use the code EFP10 at checkout.
If you go to our Linktree page, Linktree/Epic Footnote, not only will you find links to all the streaming platforms that we can hear episodes on, you'll also find a link to our merch site where you can get t-shirts, hats, hoodies, coffee mugs with our cool little logo on it. It's a great way to support us so we can keep doing episodes like this, as well as to let your friends know, hey, I like to feel old and listen to podcasts with Matt and Zach talking about how they feel old and reminiscing about their favorite albums in past years. Just throwing that out there. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you join us for another episode real soon.
See ya.